So welcome everyone to the inaugural roll call. Um, this is an effort that Ansgar, Yoav, and myself have been working on in the background and have chatted with many of you individually. And now we're trying to set this up as more of a group thing. The idea of today's call is mostly just to get everyone together and to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what exactly is happening here, what this process is, and to check that this is still what everyone would like to do. There's been a lot of hype and interest, but we want to make sure that expectations are exactly what we're going to have here. So I'll start by laying out a little bit of the vision for what this is. As you all know, the Ethereum's vision for how we achieve the end goal of servicing as many users as possible, as cheaply as possible, in as trustless a means as possible, has sort of switched from relying on the core protocol L1 onto this L2 rollup driven vision. And there have been many changes that have happened alongside of that. And I think part of this is that L1 has really been focusing on ossifying and not having too many too many changes and to be as hard to capture as possible. And so this has also sort of limited the way the changes that we've seen happen to the EVM. So we've seen the rate of improvements and things that have shipped from a new feature standpoint reduced quite a lot, and instead the core devs have been L1 core devs have been focusing on the merge and shipping 4844 and dunk sharding, vocal trees, etc., which are all absolutely essential for L2s to achieve what they need to achieve, but also don't really help the end user in terms of lots of features that are needed. And we've also seen that EVM equivalence has been something that's been very important in the roadmap of many L2s, but it seems unfortunate that we all have this goal of EVM equivalence, but we're blocked on being able to have further changes to the EVM, which may help bring new functionality in things. There've been a number of efforts previously for cooperation along these lines, but they seem to have been a lot more ad hoc around one or two particular things that people wanted to ship. And it's also, we've seen a bit of like N squared blow up, where it's like one team collaborating with another team on one particular project, as opposed to sort of this overall set of standards and collaboration efforts. And so the idea here is to try provide some incredibly neutral platform for these discussions to happen. So what exactly we're proposing here, and this is more the idea is it's a general process which is comprised of many sort of sub discussions and sub processes. Obviously, there is this call, which the idea is to have on the third week of every month. So it's a monthly call on a Wednesday at this time. But on top of that, an optional set of standards, which we've been calling RIPs up to this point. And the goal there is to primarily ensure that there are as few conflicts as possible in features that we have. There are already a number of ways in which many of these L2s are subtly incompatible, particularly with regards to some of the features that the ZK rollups have shipped, just due to the necessity and limitations of their design, which are less favorable or work less well with the existing EVM / some of the optimistic chains. So the idea here is to allow this to happen in a way where we can make sure that they're not going to be, well, as few incompatibilities as possible, because I think that's just a really unfortunate thing to have. So like ensure that we're not going to have weird precompiles deployed at the same address or something like that, where it's just like this is obviously something that could be avoided with a little bit of coordination. And then secondly, it would there are many features which are like very beneficial where that just require a bit of collaboration. So things like account abstraction, everyone is very keen on, and some people have started shipping things that look like account abstraction, but are often very subtly different from one another. And so instead of having an individual standard for each L2/rollup, we can hopefully settle on one major standard that everyone agrees to use, and ensure that this works well enough for everyone, even if it's got a slightly more limited set of features. That would be a far better outcome in terms of being able to have support from the like tooling and wallet ecosystems, et cetera, and so extending this to all of the other coordination things that we need. Also, we would like this to be a metaphorical API between L1s and L2s. So there's a lot of like L1 devs are very focused on the issues they particularly face, and are often unaware of what things are important and what changes need to happen, and also what priority those are. So if one team starts loudly proclaiming that this and this is a super important thing that needs to happen, is absolutely essential for their vision, it's hard to know whether for the L1s whether that is actually something that is a shared common thing, or it would just help out one particular team. And so this call could help be an interface for bringing that all together, and then being able to present this to present this to the L1 consensus process, and then vice versa to bubble up like changes that are happening on the L1s. Make sure that L2s are ready for forks that are happening, and so are ready for new functionality and aware of changes that might be happening that are relevant, and also to bring research forward at like important for L2s to be able to comment and maybe affect the roadmap a little bit for ways that ways that could really help them out there. So what this is not. This is a process that is, of course, non-binding. This is the process itself doesn't require any kind of commitment, and the changes that will be proposed and standards that will be proposed are entirely optional in terms of what people think is beneficial. This is not a decree. This is how things work. This is more. Here is a way that other people may or may not agree is a sensible way of doing things. And so this is still everyone here is entirely in charge of their own rollout, their own roadmaps, and how we get everywhere. Which makes it quite different from some of the other governance calls that we've seen, such as ACD, where there it's like we need to have consensus from everyone on what the next steps are and which EIPs are going to be included in which forks, etc., etc. This would more look like individual people or individual teams deciding that, hey, they want to ship this feature and here's the way they're doing it. Please can everyone else comment on how they're doing it to see if we can reach a more meaningful common standard. This is also not going to become a place for marketing and competition. This is like really supposed to be a technical set of agreements. Obviously, there's a lot of money at play here, and everyone's incentives are slightly different. So we will do this to like as much as possible to like keep these topics technical, and to try reach common standards that are in everyone's technical best interest. This is also not a call that's going to establish who is and isn't an L2. This participation here doesn't define that. And it goes beyond that, in that we actually are happy having people who aren't necessarily a part of the direct Ethereum ecosystem, but are maybe using the EVM for their own context. They're welcome to propose standards that may be helpful to the greater EVM ecosystem, but like the bias is always going to be towards rollups and L2s. But the idea is more that if something's sensible that exists somewhere else, there's no reason we can't incorporate it here too. So this is not like, it's not some exclusive group. Joining or not joining these efforts and these calls means nothing. It is just an individual set of discussions that are happening. So we can hopefully arrive at more of a central, like a single vision with as few diverging ways of doing things as possible, so that we can we can gain from some of those efficiencies in tooling, etc. So I've been working on setting this up with Ansgar and Yoav, who've been thinking about this honestly for longer than I have. Ansgar in the general sort of standardization and L2 perspective, and Yoav specifically from the account abstraction side. So I'm going to hand things over to Ansgar quickly to introduce what he's been thinking about.
Sure. Yeah. Hey everyone. I think it's really exciting that we have this process now getting off the ground. Yeah, I think Carl has already said a lot of like what the vision for this process is supposed to be. All of course very optional, but just having a shelling point for coordination. Just from my perspective, yeah, I think it's been really amazing to see all the innovation that came with layer 2s. It at the same time, it always felt like with the focus on EVM equivalence that there was this bottleneck in innovation specifically on the VM side, or at least to the extent like that the EVM set limits. And I think we've been thinking about how can we best overcome this for a while now. Of course, a lot of the individual teams here have already kind of done their own. Have found their own ways to basically go beyond this, but I think there's always been some demand to basically kind of combine the EVM equivalence with still enabling innovation. Initially, we had some ideas, I think, around basically more heavy-handed, completely fork the EVM and have like a layer 2 EVM and really start pushing the limits there. But I think from a lot of feedback from talking to people, it seems just like a heavy-handed approach is not the right thing. I think basically now we have landed on this idea of having this IP process, having basically more individual features that are fully opt-in, so you can basically mix and match whatever ones you want to support versus go with your own opinionated approach instead. I think that's a very promising direction, and yeah, I think now is also the time. I think last year when we talked about this, people also like, no, but we have other things we have to focus on the layer 2 side. I think now there's at least a little bit of breathing room to get to this. So I'm very excited for the process to get going.
And Yoav, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think so. You and Ansgar already said everything. There isn't much to add, and I'm really excited to see it finally happening. We've been discussing this. Actually, we started working on this idea since Denver, so it's been a while, and finally everyone is here. So welcome.
Great. So I think the next thing would just be to get a rough idea of who's in attendance here. Not asking everyone to introduce themselves, but like if one representative from each team / stakeholder can just mention who they are and whether like how they think this process is relevant, if they think it's relevant or not. Not asking for long discussions, but just sort of like a 30-second of, hey, this is who we are, and this is generally something we think is meaningful or not, or whatever.
I can start. Nicolas for Linear. So thanks a lot for organizing this. I think there are many things that can be quite interesting to discuss during this meeting. So, I mean, we saw some discussion in the chat on the state representation, and it's a key topic for all the KVMs. So I think it's a very interesting one. Another one, I think, kind of easy one, I think that we could work on is what we do for the difficulty of code. We know that in the layer 1, it's a random number, and I think that for all layer 2s, it's complicated for it to be a random number. So that's some easy stuff that could be done there, I think. And maybe one comment is we should be careful, even if we say, okay, everybody can do whatever he wants. We should be careful not to arrive in a situation where actually everybody does everything he wants, because it can be a mess. So, like, we know that it's impossible to add any precompile in the layer one. Like BLS has been incredibly difficult to get and been discussed for ages. We should not go too crazy on the layer two. I think we should try to say, okay, let's not have 20 different precompiles on the layer two, for example. But very happy to be there. And again, thanks a lot for organizing this.
Thanks, Nicholas. Someone just put their hand up. Yes, PGO, you're up.
Oh, hi, everybody. This is I'm Paul from Polygon. I don't know if I see anybody else from Polygon on the call at the moment. So, but you guys all know Hudson Jameson. He's at Polygon now, and then Paul Gebham has been involved with a lot of discussions with the ecosystem about various proposals. So, yeah, thanks again for thanks again for putting this together. This has been it's a time has come for sure. Basically, I won't go into detail here. I think we've been putting out pips basically to discuss various ideas that we have about kind of top of mind issues to talk to the ecosystem about. Things like account abstraction 3074. I think we've got a pip for SecP R1, the built-ins, and obviously the ZK integration and having standardized APIs. For all that is very, very topical for us and something that we're very interested in working with other layer twos on as well. You mentioned the issue of competition. I think it's a good call out here basically, but from my perspective, I'd like to emphasize that there's such thing as good competition and bad competition. And bad competition would be a lot of people trying to fight for kind of their own bespoke standards, basically, as opposed to us kind of at least agreeing that we can build something better by kind of doing it the right way the first time. So that's kind of the mindset that we have at Polygon. So that's all I got so far.
Great, thanks. Ed?
Hey everyone, Ed Felton from Off-Chain Labs, developers of Arbitrum, and my colleagues Harry Kolodner and Austin are also on this call. From where I sit, I think, first of all, thanks. Let me join the thanks for getting this going. I think the two highest goals for this in my mind first are to address issues that are common across all rollups, especially ones that L1 doesn't see or doesn't have, so that we can find solutions to the things that we're all facing. And then second, deconfliction, to make sure that we don't get into a position accidentally where we are incompatible with L1 or incompatible with each other. So just making sure that that we can move forward with confidence on some things without worrying about that kind of conflict.
Great, thank you. Tiago?
Hey everyone, I'm Tiago. I'm CEO at ARC and also co-founder of 3 Sigma. And for us, there are multiple issues that I think is important to address, especially for ARC. From our perspective, interoperability standards are the most important ones. So for example, the standardization of wallet UX, like we were discussing, it's very important for us since we'll be deploying multi-chain apps. Also because we'll be deploying different rollups, different L2s with different tech stacks. It's very important to get standards around shared bridges of the different ecosystems. And also, I would say that finding some compatibilities and standards so that shared sequencer projects can work with different rollups using the different tech stacks is also quite important. And coming here also on Paul on the competition standpoint, I think finding these standards and, for example, understanding how multi-chain apps can work, this might eventually lead to a more co-opetition scenario between the different L2s instead of direct competition for liquidity and projects. Finally, thank you again, Ethereum Foundation, for the call, and hope everyone enjoys.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I have no idea how to pronounce your handle.
Hey, I'm Kalman from ZK Sync Matter Labs. We're also very excited about this opportunity. I personally think that the most easiest things to do would be things around standardizing chain ID derivation, and also standardizing the layer 1, layer 2 bridges across different rollups. It would make it much easier for different dApp developers to have one standard interface which they could use. And in the future, this could also be expanded to layer 2 to layer 2 standards. Thank you. Also, I forgot to mention that Stas Breadless is also on the call from ZK Sync Matter Labs, and Anthony Rose. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Coleman. Proto?
Hello, everyone. I'm Proto from OP Labs. Well, again, thank you for hosting this call. It's a good effort for layer 2s. And yeah, I want to call out two things why this is meaningful. One, it's to get the right product feedback from layer 2s to like the wider community, get these kind of standards. And specifically, when it comes to infrastructure, I think we have been introducing protocol changes on layer 1, and then we have infrastructure of end users that's like an afterthought, whereas really the infrastructure around FOR and other EIPs should just be there. It should, like, similar to how the execution APIs are really, really critical to Ethereum, but never really have been so much a part of the EIP process. Layer 2s add significant infrastructure requirements with the increased scale, and having standard infrastructure would be really nice. And then second, what I'm hoping for is to meet that idea of deconflicting like future improvements, and the idea of adding things is to just standardize a path for extending Ethereum. So I doubt we'll ever get to a situation where everything will be the exact same. But if we have a standard way of extending the block header in a compatible way, then we can allow for differences on layer 2s while still making the lives of tooling developers easier. Okay, and I think Mark is also on this call. We're very interested to hear all of your thoughts on layer 2 standardization. Thank you.
Thanks, Proto. Roberto?
Hey, Roberto here. I'm from Coinbase. I think I'm the only one from Coinbase in the call. There may be others I have missed. Specifically, I'm on the base team. We're quite interested in standardization around account abstraction, EVM scaling, developer tooling. So yeah, very happy to see this being organized, and looking forward to what we come up with.
Great, thank you. Peter?
Yeah, this is Peter from Scroll. We also have Mohammed and Howie from our team here. Yeah, I agree with everyone. We're mostly excited about extending the EVM and the RPC standard APIs, as mentioned before, and excited to be part of the process.
Perfect, thanks. Alex?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm part of the Epsilon team, which is EF funded and works on EVM research. The two main pieces we work on, you may have heard about, is EOF, or EVM object format, and EVM Max, which tries to give primitives so that we wouldn't need all these precompiles. And of course, so far we have been trying to introduce these features to mainnet, which, as Carl mentioned, is quite challenging. So this call is definitely super interesting to us, to see how any of these changes could be coordinated across L2s and maybe mainnet. And I also wanted to maybe take the opportunity to mention that we are organizing a EVM summit at DevConnect, and we do have planned to have some similar topics as discussed here, but this the summit is not related to what Carl and Yoav and Ansgar is organizing. But I would like to invite everyone, if you're interested, to discuss this also there.
Thank you. Is anyone else, would anyone else like to intro themselves / team?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead. Hi, I'm Peter from Immutable, and I'm certain I'm the only person on the call because it's midnight here, middle of the night. What we want to get out of this call, and so thank you very much for organizing it, by the way. What we want to get out of this is having commonality of L2s so that running across multiple provers will be smooth and seamless, and so that a multi-prover, multi-rollup system, decentralized sequences will just work. So that's what we're about, is multi-prover, multi-chain, and just being able to get all that to just work.
Thanks, Peter. Dano?
Yeah, I'm Daniel Farron. I'm one of the maintainers on the Hyperledger Basis, focusing mostly on the EVM. I've also been working with Team Epsilon and some of the EVM implementer calls to try and get EOF over the line and shipped, implementing a lot of the features in Besu. My salary is also paid by Swirls Labs, who implements Hedera, so that gives a little bit of exposure to the Alt L1 scene. And I think the biggest open question we have is to get a more firm definition on what Ethereum equivalence is and is not. So that's something that would, I think benefit not just L2s, but the greater EVM ecosystem.
Okay, thanks, Dano. Definitely a topic we can get into at some point. Anyone else like to intro themselves? Ulas?
And hello. Firstly, thanks for organizing this call. It's a great. I think I'm Ulaş. I'm co-author of EIP 7212, and I'm here with Doğan, the other co-author. We are also from the Clave team, and excited to present the EIP and discuss about the current progress in the further timeline.
Great, thank you. And we definitely get into your EIP in a moment. Last call for intros. Great. Okay. So the next thing, as Axik was mentioning, they've got DevConnect coming up in Istanbul next month, and what we're envisioning is sort of the next iteration of this call will be in person, pretty much, with breakout sessions, more whiteboarding style to get into some, hopefully some more problem solving things around some of these some of the topics we can touch on later on this call. So that's happening as a part of the L2 Days event organized by L2 Beat and Scroll, which is on the 15th of November. I'll drop a link to the webpage. Hopefully by the end of this week, we will have more details for you in terms of what our specific thing is. So on the second day of this, we're going to have a stage dedicated to these discussions. Yeah, anyone have any questions about L2 Days / what's happening in Istanbul? No? Okay. So next is the topic of RIPs, and I'm going to hand over to Ansgar to let him elaborate on what we've been thinking.
Yeah, great. So as I think Colin mentioned earlier a little bit already, we have thought a little about kind of the structure that this collaboration coordination effort could take, and yeah, RIPs seemed like a reasonable first element of that. So I think, like most or probably all of you already know, we have the EIP process on Ethereum mainnet. for proposed changes to all rules that are consensus critical. That's mostly EVM related changes. Historically, that has been combined with the ERCs, which are just community standards. So anyone can just create an ERC on anything, does not have to actually be relevant for mainnet directly. We are now in the process of splitting these out. So EIPs and ERCs will be separate, but under the same umbrella. We're going to call these topic groups. And so when talking about how could we basically fit into this, it just was a very natural idea to just basically become a third topic group. So there will be EIPs, ERCs, and then what we propose are IPs to become. And the idea was basically to just have that as a standard for all kind of layer 2 specific changes like EVM extensions that are not directly kind of targeting mainnet. And so EIPs would just not be a good fit. Being basically a topic group under the same umbrella as EIPs and ERCs would mean that we share the same numbering scheme. So it would not start with RIP1, but with RIP 7000 something, wherever we're at. Also means that if there's ever an EIP 7500, there will never be an RIP with the same number, and the other way around. We would have a separate repo though, Ethereum/RIPs or something. And then we would reuse the same ETH Magicians forum that I assume most of you have already been on at various points in the past to discuss EIPs, ERCs. I think that has proven itself to actually just be a very just nice place to facilitate discussion. One specific aspect as well is that with EIPs and ERCs, we have so-called editors. Those are just people that basically make sure every time there's a new EIP proposed that it follows just the formal rules of the structure the document has to have and these kind of things. Obviously, it's not an opinionated role. You're not supposed to have an opinion on whether it's a good change or not. Just enforcing the structure. We would also need equivalent RIP editors. So the first call of action here would be that if maybe anyone here on the call thinks they would want to be involved as a volunteer, or if they know someone on their team that would want to be involved as a volunteer. I think the idea is that once we come together in person in Istanbul, that we basically get an initial group of people together there that would want to take on this role. There are some others, basically more nuanced differences to the existing EIP process where we would want to kind of dive more into more details in Istanbul. For example, EIPs have like very defined statuses. So you give draft and then later on your review and final and everything. And we would basically have to slightly adjust that and think about what does it mean in the layer 2 context. What status would correspond, at what point, for example, if I want to implement this as a layer 2, I want to implement a standard, when can I rely on that it will no longer change, right? So basically mapping that to this new setting, this kind of work. And of course, just to reiterate, this like the big difference to EIPs is that this is not consensus forming, right? It's just standards. So every layer 2 can at any point decide to opt in, opt out, right? So it's a very different process. In that regard, and then there's some other small aspects. So, for example, I think one open question is the exact scope of this. So for, say, non-EVM changes or layer 2 specific standards, I think we have to basically figure out where the line is, what should be an RIP versus maybe an ERC or some other type of standard, right? So there's some more open questions. And then I think one really exciting topic that once we get this off the ground, I think will become more important over time, will be the relationship with layer 1. Obviously, as people have been saying, it's one thing to make sure that if there's several different layer 2s want to implement some cryptographic primitive, that they do it in the same way, ideally, unless they have specific reasons not to. But then ideally, of course, if mainnet 2 years later, I guess that's even optimistic timeline with mainnet, ever decides to support that as well, of course, it would be really, really unfortunate if it doesn't follow the same standard then, right? So basically, how can we get layer 1 people already involved in this process without slowing it down, of course? How then RIPs and later on EIPs, once the target mainnet related. So I think those are a lot of questions we have to figure out. But I think for this call, probably just to keep it not going completely out of scope, I think I'd want to, just get some feedback on in general if people think this is a reasonable approach. If there's maybe some small things you would want to see done slightly differently or something. But then I think the details we would want to work out in Istanbul. So yeah.
Yes, Ed.
Yeah, so I think in cases where we're talking about standardizing something which L1 might also want to do, and where we're worried about a conflict, say it's something like a new precompile to support some elliptic curve group that we're interested in and that L1 doesn't want to do yet. In a case like that, it seems like a sensible way to do it to make sure that L1 is on board is to have it be an EIP, but specify in the EIP that implementation is optional and each chain can decide whether to implement. That way, L1 is bought into the particular design of it, and they're bought into reserving the precompile address and other things like that. As opposed to us developing something ourselves as an RIP, and then L1 kind of maybe having more optionality later to do something inconsistent, right? If we want to deconflict with them, we need them on board early on. And I think having it be one of their standards, but stated across, but optional implementation across all chains is maybe a better way to do that.
Yeah,
So just to elaborate.
Sorry.
Yeah, Yoav.
No, I was just saying that this is actually a part of the this is a part of the RIP of the goals of the RIP process. Is that layer one devs will be in the process, will be involved in the process, and we will have some sort of commitment of that once an RIP gets, for example, if a precompile gets reserved, then it will not be used for something else on layer one. So I think this is one of the goals of the current effort.
But if I could jump back in, it's not just making sure that the numbers don't conflict. It's also, I think, making sure that L1 doesn't introduce a slightly incompatible different version.
Yes.
Leading to confusion,
Yes.
right? And so having a standard that they are bought into fully from the beginning seems really important for those cases where it's not just an L2 thing, but consistency with L1 is an issue.
So part of the idea here, and this is a bit of what I was trying to get to, is being a metaphorical API, is if we come up with an RIP, say for a curve support, as you're talking about, that we'd like to have enshrine, then I think it would be wise to go from here on to then raising this in one of the ACD calls to draw attention to it from the L1 devs to be like, does this seem like a sensible thing? And then they can voice opinions on whether that's something, whether that would be feasible to implement on L1, or whether they would need to have these small incompatible changes made. And then if it ever does ship as onto the on L1, we can have a separate EIP which points to the RIP, basically saying like, here is the standard for how it's done, and this is this is where you can find the implementation. And then the idea being that in RIPs, I think something that wasn't quite touched on, we can maintain which chain/L2s do and don't implement things. So as we see more and more adoption for a particular RIP, because again, this is not something that would necessarily happen all at once, we can add the list of who is supporting a particular thing. Tim, you've had your hand raised.
Yeah, maybe also I think I agree with everything you just said, and maybe to add two more bits. One is that a list of potentially reserved precompile addresses on L1 seems like something that could be a valuable EIP. It came up in the context of like an ERC literally this week as well. So I think that's probably the amount of like signal you can get from L1. But I would push towards having like a standard as the RIP to start, just because it can literally be years for L1 to adopt something. If you look at, say, the BLS precompile, which is probably the least controversial precompile, we've been talking about it since 2018 and it's still not live. So just the speed at which rollups can iterate and move on this stuff is, probably an order of magnitude quicker than what L1 can do. And so I I would try to have as little blocks or checks, like mandatory checks from L1 onto the L2 process. And not to say that like you shouldn't sanity check with like L1 devs if they think it's a good idea or whatnot, but I think having the RIP be a separate process and like being able to move quicker is extremely valuable. And then yeah, maybe having a list of just reserved precompiles or whatnot. And potentially what we can do as well is something like set a specific like chunk of addresses. Yeah, a specific registry that's like, these will be all the L2 precompiles. L1 will never overwrite them. And if we were to ever import something, you know, this is the default address space it would go to. Just want to be mindful of like L1 is extremely slow in doing stuff. And so if you're building your process over like L1 validation, it's probably just going to slow it down unnecessarily.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Agree with pretty much everything you mentioned then. Again, like a lot of this is trying to free ourselves from some of the coordination and speed issues we see on L1, but also not be too free such that we end up breaking things or be incompatible. So walking that line is going to be something we're going to have to figure out as it goes. Some other items that were mentioned, Proto brought up licensing. So strong agree here that RIPs will all need to be some sort of open source licensed, which will be able to be freely edited and not owned. Again, this is a non-competitive, non-marketing thing that we're trying to set up here. It's purely for collaboration and standardization. Another thing, Dano, you brought up the idea of progressive precompiles. Can you elaborate what you mean on that?
So that's a thread in Ethereum Magicians. It's a way to deal with bringing in new precompiles. And you would start by defining them as a solidity form. And the solidity form or the EVM form is the definition of the precompile. And you would like canonize it at a certain address through create to process. So then when you implement it, you could do a native implementation of like, say, the R1 precompile or whatever curve you want to bring in. So that way there's a definition that everyone can bring in without work if they're okay with really slow stuff. There's issues around, how do we modify gas charging for that? How do you make it, so we don't get the full cost of the EVM and we reduce it to a more optimized value. But I think as far as, reserving spaces and numbers, that's something that might be worth considering as we go through the process. Or we could just go with the registry, which is also another fine option.
Okay, I think that makes that makes some sense. Anyone else have some things I'd like to mention with regards to RIPs? Nope. Oh, Ansgar.
Yeah, just wanted to briefly say, of course, this is like a big undertaking, and there's a lot of, I think, open questions. I think the idea of this call is also more to just basically start the process, present the idea, and then we'll have to figure a lot of these questions out over the next few months. Hopefully, we can make some progress in Istanbul already with people. Hopefully, at least as many as possible people in the same room, and enough time to really dive into this. But a lot of this will probably have to be refined over time as we actually see in practice how the interaction across layer 2s between layer 2 and layer 1 goes. So this is by no means like a finalized proposal here. It's more of like, this is how we want to get started and then take it from there.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so next topic I'd like to jump into is the R1 precompile. So that's EIP 7212. Obviously, it being an EIP is already a thing we can think about, but it's a candidate that I think is very meaningful to bring, that I think would have a lot of use, and is another one of these seemingly just makes sense kind of things. SecP 256 R1 has a lot of usage, but anyways, I'm going to give it over again to Ansgar to dig into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the idea was basically just to say that we have some technical topics we would want to talk about in Istanbul. A lot of these are like bigger topics that wouldn't make sense today anyway to dive into. This one specific precompile has been around for the last few months now and just seems to be in a really nice place where a lot of the tools we've been talking to have already said that they'd really be interested in shipping this as soon as possible. And so we were thinking this might be a good candidate as like the first RAP, so that's why we wanted to basically just have a small section on this call to just discuss it, and then the idea, the hope would be that maybe in Istanbul we could already basically finalize its spec, and so that we could really ship this as the first RAP. The idea is just as you probably know, like Ethereum for UAs, so for the enshrined cryptography, we use the SegP 256K1 curve, which is relatively uncommon outside of blockchain, and so there's the much more common basically sister curve of the SegP 256R1. That, for example, is also supported by a lot of these hardware secure enclave systems and the WebAuthn standard and everything. So there's been a lot of desire to have this natively supported. I think there are implementations just in Solidity, but that's like 1 million gas per invocation. So it's really quite inefficient. There has been this EIP. We already heard in the intro round from the EIP authors. EIP 7212 in EIP so far, of course, because there has not been an RIP process so far. So yeah, what I would want to do is maybe briefly have the EIP authors give an update of where the EIP is at, if there's like what the remaining open questions are, and then maybe briefly here talk about how layer twos feel about this as a potential candidate for first RIP.
Sure, thank you. I can talk about our current progress and open questions and current discussions about the IP. After we have discussed the IP in the ACDC call, the community has suggested us to apply an L2 first approach. From that time, we have been discussed with some L2s and rollups to implement this EIP, and zk-sync has already made a huge progress on building these precompiles in zk-sync era rollup. Then Polygon team has requested that PIP to discuss implementing it to the Polygon chain. We have already published it, and currently we are still on the review phase, and we have some still open questions. The biggest question, which is also talked in the ACD call, was having a recovery or verification as a precompile contract. We have started with verification because it's the standard of the curve and it's only supported in the devices who is using this elliptic curve, and the recovery is not supported in this kind of devices. Also, the programming language has already support for the verification operation, but they don't support recovery. So having some client implementations are harder in the recovery part. Also, in the EOAs, making a recovery makes sense because you get the public address of the accounts, but in this situation, I don't see a real value of making recovery. So we have choose verification, but it's still open to discuss. The second open question is having a malleability check in the precompile contract. EC recover already has it, but we have removed it in this phase because it's not included in the curve standards. So we want to cover all of the test vectors of the elliptic curve. Then the last discussion is having these precompiled contracts as a progressive precompile, which as mentioned earlier, it might allow to use the same address in every chain by a Solidity code, then replace it with a precompiled contract. And last note, we have published a client implementation for the Go Ethereum clients, and a developer from the community has implemented it for the Rust Ethereum, and Basic Client has this elliptic curve in its native library, and I guess it would be easier to implement as a precompiled contract. And it's all progress and discussion from my side.
Thank you,
Okay,
Ross.
yeah. Yeah, awesome. I think indeed, I think that talking to people, it sounded to me also that the biggest remaining open question on the specific precompile would be whether to follow the NIST standard, which indeed is basically you just you get a signature and a pub key and verify the signature, as opposed to the more Ethereum native way that we do with K1 signatures, where with the EC recover precompile, where you only take the signature and then instead of verifying that it was indeed signed by a specific pub key, you recover the one valid pub key that could have signed the signature. So it's a bit of a different logic. There's some small efficiency advantages doing it with the EC recover, because then you don't have to store an entire pub key. You only have to store, say, some sort of a hash. But yeah, as Ulrich was saying, is that basically because the NIST standard is such a common standard that basically all the implementations only support the verification, so it would be a huge effort to have a Ethereum specific EC recover logic instead. I think that's why most people were favoring the verify approach. And there's also, again, with another small difference is in signature malleability. The NIST standard explicitly allows for malleability. Of course, Ethereum usually tries to avoid that. But yeah, so basically there's just like some small remaining decisions to be made here, and then this would be something that we could finalize the spec of and have ready for layer 2s that would want to ship this. Also, of course, Exik just mentioned in the chat that there's that has been discussed before, that there are alternative approaches. There's this EVM Max proposition that's been around for a long time to basically just make more arbitrary elliptic curve operations in Ethereum cheaper by adding these more generic primitives that can be combined. There's some estimate that could bring down the R1 verification to something like 70,000 gas. A native precompile would be more like 2,000 to 3,000 gas, so it's still quite a bit of a difference, but less so than 1 million gas, of course. So at this point, what I would be mostly curious, I think, kind of making sure that the spec is finalized, we can do that in Istanbul. What I'd be curious more would be to hear from different layer 2 teams, if you've already been in contact with this specific precompile proposal. Is this something that you'd be interested in shipping if it were to become an RIP and agreed upon spec-wise between the different layer 2s? Is this something that you'd not be interested? You'd rather want to go with the EVM Max route, or you just want to wait until mainnet or something? Basically, yeah, just getting layer 2 team, getting your team's takes on whether this would make a good RIP is what I'd be interested in. Yes.
Yeah, so that's
Joe?
Yeah, there's EVM. Oh, sorry. Let's speak.
Go ahead, Nicholas.
No, please.
I'll just go real quick. It's already been mentioned that Polygon is very interested in this proposal. So it's both a great proposal for us, but then it's also, I think it's a great candidate to be kind of the initial way that we work through and figure out how this process is going to work. So we're definitely in favor.
And Nicholas?
I will go next one. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to look at the EVM implementations because I think a lot of work has been spent there, as nobody had the curves he wanted and so on. And for us, it's a reasonable trade-off, actually. So I think for 2 reasons. First, because everybody has exactly the same implementation, because it's not anymore having to agree on a precompile. It's available in the layer 1 as well, which is always good for compatibility. So I think we should really be sure that these approaches don't work before going for the precompile at this stage, considering all the work that has been spent on that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think the only comment that I would have on this would just be that obviously, like our role here would not be to be opinionated, to convince people whether they would want to go ahead with this precompile or instead take a different route. We've just been hearing from teams that some of them are really kind of wanting to either just chip this on their own in their own version, or if we want to have a standard, then really basically people were telling us the standard would have to be finalized very soon, otherwise we don't want to wait for too long. So again, I think the general spirit of this group would be more to just say if there is interest in shipping something by some teams, then basically like we'd be happy to facilitate the standard, and we don't want to make a call on whether you should or should not do so. Oh yeah, a lot of people. Carl, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think you got most of it. But yeah, just to mention again that like all of these proposed standards will be optional. We're not defining the one way to do things in an L2 EVM. It's about presenting some standards which you can opt into and implement if you so wish on a given L2. And yeah, I think a lot of these things are very complementary, and different trade-offs make sense for different people. Thanks.
Right, Harry?
Yeah, just wanted to say from the optimistic world perspective, I think the nice thing about things like this is that they tend to be relatively straightforward to implement, just because kind of if there's a like standard implementation in Go Ethereum, that's kind of relatively easily incorporated. I think that like from my perspective, this seems like a very nice sort of initial kind of target, just because it feels relatively non-contentious and obviously quite high value. I think that like all of my concerns around it would be kind of much more just figuring out the kind of underlying sort of, okay, making sure there are like how we can avoid conflicts with L1, how we can like also kind of optimally coordinate around sort of tooling and other stuff. Like I feel like it's a kind of opportunity in a relatively non-contentious way to kind of feel out the borders of what really works here.
Sounds good. Kalmanla. Yeah, I can't pronounce this, but you go ahead.
Hey, so on our side at ZK Sync, the precompile is also ready, so we're also very excited about this opportunity.
Right. Yeah, then I would say it seems at least there's enough interest that it would make sense. So obviously we haven't even created the IP repo yet. We'll do this over the next, at some point between now and Istanbul, and then work with the Clave team to basically figure out either just turn the existing EIP into an RIP, if that makes sense, or just create a new one or something to have that. I think still in Istanbul, part of the conversation, besides just finalizing it, could also still be evaluating alternative approaches, and just so people can make up their minds whether they think this is a good idea to go ahead with or not. The only ask that I would have then would be for teams that are ready, and I think ZK Sync is probably the one that's already the furthest in kind of implementing this, that at least ideally you hold off of like finalizing decisions here before we have to start, or if you of course feel strongly that you'd want to go ahead, then maybe at least kind of come and briefly talk with Carl and me, so we are at least aware of this. But yeah, I think the idea is in either way would be to have this basically become a finalized standard on a very like fast timeline, because it's a small change. And there's been considerable interest on the layer 1 side as well already. So I think layer 1 devs would be more than happy to also basically participate in that conversation, to make sure that if we ever bring it to mainnet, that this generally aligns with what layer 1 people feel about this. Awesome. I think that's probably a good conclusion to the R1 section of the call.
Yep. Thank you. It seems like Tim has got some kind of pop-up thing going on in the chat. So if you're interested in that, have a look over there. So on the topic of Istanbul, some other things that we would like to be discussing there, and some of them have been brought up already. The first one would be
stake commitment / RollCall, which I believe Nicholas referred to. So yeah, I think that'd be a pretty helpful thing. Obviously, there's been a lot of work done already on mainnet for that, and I think now would be sort of this would be a good time to get feedback from L2s on what potential issues there are for using what we already have in terms of research for mainnet, because there's a chance that we could be getting this into the next mainnet hard fork. So I think like now's one of those moments where L2s need to look towards L1 to see if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think that's vocal. EOF is obviously something that's been discussed a lot. We've seen a lot of consideration there. It is something, again, that'd be a lot easier to ship on the L2 side of things and would allow a lot of the discussions and changes we've been talking about here to happen a lot more easily. Should we have EOF? I believe there was a peep and eep done on this yesterday, so keep an eye out for that. That'd be something that it'd be nice to have people caught up on and have opinions on by Istanbul. Account abstraction is obviously always a very big topic, and that's really Yoav's expertise here. But again, would be a good discussion to be having in Istanbul. And then some more general ones that have come up is a standardized way of handling fee markets and multi-dimensional gas pricing. We'll definitely have a breakout on that. Bridges is something that's been discussed, and what this multi-chain lifestyle would look like. And any other topics, we will be posting an ETH Magicians thread on some more of the details and topics, an outline for what's going to happen by the end of this week for Istanbul. And so we'll encourage you all to contribute to that. Does anyone have any other topics that immediately like to mention that they'd like to discuss on in Istanbul at DevConnect?
One of the things we brought this up along in the channel already, but one of the things that we're working on here at Polygon is because we already have existent provers which do use a sparse Merkle tree, and we're seeing that as being something that's sort of starting to exist in the ecosystem. We would like to talk about how we can start working toward a standard on that, or at least standardize as much as possible, so that tool builders, people that are interacting with these things have a good starting point. So I don't know if we'll be able to get to a full standard for that, but we would like to start talking about that and seeing if there's interest for that in Istanbul.
Great. Yes, I think that brings us to the end of some of the more technical discussions. So I think some of the some other things that are important and things to think about moving forward, and certainly before we see each other in Istanbul. One is this whole process is not something that Ansgar, you and myself are trying to run here. We're just trying to provide like a credibly neutral platform for discussion. So we would really like this to be community run as much as possible. And I think a good first example of that is RIP editors. It would be really cool and helpful if teams can nominate people that they have to contribute to this and help as editors. If that's something that you'd like to do. Other things, as mentioned, we'd really like to potentially make some final decisions on R1 precompile. So that would be helpful. If everyone can think about that. I just posted the Magicians thread on that if you haven't read up on some of the latest discussions there. We have this Telegram group that we've discussed some things in. I think that's been good for some of the discussions, but it's also led to there being bottlenecks for people joining.
mainly just when us admins can add you. So soon we will be porting that over to the ETH R&D Discord, which I think makes a lot more sense. It's the same way we handle ACD discussions and the consensus layer discussions as well. And then that's just fully open. So watch out for that. And then we'll connect up the Telegram group we have again as a bridge between that. So you can still follow that if you need to via Telegram. And yeah, I think, does anyone else have any final things they would like to raise or discuss in the last little bit of this call?
Sure, Carl. So I've put together an EIP too about EVM profiles. So the idea is that we talk about type 1, type 2, type 3, and what we're seeing at Immutable across the different rollup implementations is different opcodes being implemented, different precompiles being implemented. And for the things that say like the ran down difficulty, having different values potentially being returned. So having a standardization on that would be really good. And in the agenda for this call, there was a link to the ETH Magicians conversation on that EIP, and hence the link back to the actual EIP itself. So I encourage you to all have a look at it and provide feedback.
Thank you, Peter. Yep, I posted the link to that in this chat as well. Would encourage people to take a look at that, and we can discuss further in person in Istanbul. Other further topics? Anyone want to raise their hand? Going once. Going twice. Okay. Well, then, thank you everyone for attending. I'm excited to see where we can take this. I think there's a lot of platform for collaboration. And then I look forward to seeing lots of you in Istanbul at primarily it's again the Wednesday, the second day of the L2 days. We'll be having a dedicated event to these kinds of discussions. And then there's also that separate event, which is the EVM day, as Asik was mentioning. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.